instead of saying, look, my job as a seller is to persuade somebody to buy my product, my job as seller is to listen to my buyer, understand the things that are truly most important to them in terms of the challenges they face and the outcomes they want to achieve by addressing those challenges, and then help them get those.
Right.
So yeah, one is, hey, it's all about me. The other, it's, hey, it's all about them. And how can I help you achieve what's important to you?
Team, that was Andy Paul. And Andy hosts the world's most successful sales podcast. It's called the Sales Enablement Podcast. And he's actually completed, as of the time we recorded this, about 1,080 different episodes. Think of that. I've actually been on his show a couple of times, and this is his second appearance on our show. And I always love chatting with Andy. He's also a very, very established author. He's written 3 great books on selling. The first was Zero Time Selling back in 2012. The second, Amp Up Your Sales, 2015. And today we're talking about his latest book, 2022, Sell Without Selling Out, a guide to success on your own terms. We talk about a lot of great things in today's podcast, one of which we get into those 4 core sales behaviors that Andy believes everybody needs to have to be successful. You need to be able to make a connection. You need to be curious. You need to drive understanding. You need to be very much not just know about your customer, but understand their situation. And finally, generosity is one of the core 4 sales behaviors. We do a real deep dive on what I call discovery, but what Andy calls helping the buyer build an effective vision of success. So how do you help them get what they really want out of the solution that you can provide? Andy's wisdom, again, is unsurpassed when you start to think of the number of conversations he's had on the topic of professional selling. There's just a tremendous amount of wisdom there. Great conversation today. I always really enjoy speaking with and learning from Andy, and I'm sure you will too here today. And if you do, by the way, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast and send it to your friends. Thank you for doing that. Here's Andy Paul. Hey, Andy, welcome back to the show.
Mark, thanks for having me.
So as you know, I'm a big fan, Andy, and really excited to talk about Sell Without Selling Out today. Sell Without Selling Out. But as I touched on briefly in the introduction, team, Andy, you got a number of great books. So I started following you back in 2012 with Zero Time Selling. Mm-hmm. I love the idea of Milt. So of all the books that I'd ever read, I love the idea of creating this avatar of a mature salesperson who maybe sold and managed. I think now at the end, he was selling materials into construction, but he really played the pragmatist throughout the book, asking all the questions as to how will this stuff really help me? And so just a great book. That was my introduction to you.
Which was a fun book to write too, because this is my first book. And I think, I thought it'd be easier to sort of do things in more of a dialogue as opposed to a monologue. So,
well, maybe I should have tried that. I'm trying my first book right now, and it is a labor of pain, to be sure. This is not a core competency for me, for sure. And then you followed it up 3 years later with Amp Up Your Sales, another great book. The foreword was by Anthony Iannarino, and that's where I first heard or came across how you sell is much more important than what you sell. Mm-hmm. I think it was one of the first lines in his introduction to it. But the sections you laid out talked about all those critically important things in selling. Simplifying the whole process, responsiveness, maximizing value. So gang, 2015, value. Can we actually maximize the value we provide? Still an issue in 2022 when we're recording this. Follow-up, prospecting, qualification, stories that sell, and then selling through customer service. Probably lesser known maybe to some was 2019, but I love, and if you folks don't have a copy of this, the Sales Growth Planner and Journal, as my wife will tell me, there's something wrong with me because I was always one of those people who love the daily planners.
Right.
So day timers from 40 years ago. This had that feeling to me of being a beautifully created day timer for professional sales.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. I mean, we've only did 1 year. We keep thinking we should update it. And
I think you should. Actually, I really think you should. And a lot of our printed materials in our training, people love it and they keep it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm writing myself a note to
there you
do
go.
that.
Fantastic. So that ends up leading to where we are now with Sell Without Selling Out 2022. I mentioned this to you in another conversation we had a couple of months ago, but first of all, I just love the look and feel of the book. I read a lot of sales books, but of course, this has got the look and feel of the Coaching Habit. Michael Bungay Stanier. I think you guys have the same
publisher. Yeah.
Same publisher. But I have to call it out, Andy. I read a lot of books here. I have never seen a list of testimonials like the list of testimonials at the beginning of this book. Everybody in the top 30, most well-known sales minds out there, everybody provides a testimonial for this book. And so it's actually shocking that everybody agreed to do that. Like, it's just amazing to me that you got everybody. But of course, that comes from the Sales Enablement podcast. I'm sure you know all of those people well.
I've had the occasion to talk to a lot of them. Yes. So yeah, that did make it a little easier to say, hey, could you spend a few minutes and read this and let me know what you think?
Yeah, and boy, were they ever happy they did. And the praise was just glowing. But given the fact that I'm trying to choke out this first book, this is your third book.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, after and the first two were so great. So when you sit down to start writing the third one, what really prompted the need for this third one? What drove you to write Sell Without Selling Out?
The fact that we're not getting any better at selling is really the bottom line, right? Is all the conversations I've had with, I really started the podcast by the time my second book was published.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a long gap between books, but and yeah, over the course of over 1,000 conversations with virtually 1,000 really smart people, it's like, well, why aren't we doing better? Right? What's holding us back? Why are we still struggling with this thing we've been doing for years? And granted, there've been changes in technology and so, but I've sold through all these changes. And I really felt like it's not only we're not getting better, it's actually we're getting worse. So that really prompted me to say, okay, what's the reason? And I identified what I think was a fairly simple cause for a lot of the problems. And it's been a problem that's bedeviled sales forever. And we're just not dealing with it. In fact, I think we've, through a lot of the processes and methodologies that have sprung up over the last 10 to 15 years, we're encouraging bad behavior.
And that bad behavior, you talk about a couple of different ways. It's selling out.
Yes.
So there's the title, Sell Without Selling Out, or it's becoming salesy.
Salesy, yep.
And then the opposite of that is selling in. So let's talk about the definitions of both those. What is selling out in professional sales?
And the simplest definition for it is when you, as a seller, put your interest ahead of those of the buyer.
Yeah.
And what that does then is that sort of leads you down this path to behaviors that I in the book talk about being sort of persuasion-driven behaviors, where it's all about you and what you want. And this idea that, and I cite research in the book that has been done that shows that people, human beings, universally to a person around the world, doesn't matter what culture, and resist being persuaded.
Right. So
yeah, I find it ironic that this is sort of at the forefront of the way we train sellers to try to work with buyers is let's be persuasion driven. But if you're putting your own interest ahead of the buyer, then all these things we talk about, understanding the buyer and what's important to them just doesn't matter to you as a seller, because I still have to persuade you to buy my product, whether I understand those things or not.
Right. Well, I find it, so you talked about these things are so prevalent. you know Philip Squire from
Yes.
Kinsale in the UK, and in his great book, one of the things he cites is the first ever documented literature on selling. And I'm going to get the dates wrong.
Yeah,
but it's just so funny. It was an article warning people off against traveling salespeople. Mm-hmm. Like, I just love the first ever published words were saying, be careful of these guys. You can't trust them.
Well, yeah, and there was even something with they discovered, some archaeologists found something that was even before, I think, formal written language. So it's Phoenician somewhere, but somebody documenting in an engraving in a stone, a tablet, beware of this seller, right? Untrustworthy. And it's like, sure, things never change, right?
And it keeps getting reinforced through social media right up into The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Poor Gil from The Simpsons is always, all of my friends, by the way, who are lawyers, love to point back to Gil from The Simpsons. Every time they have no idea what I do for a living. Every time they love pointing back to that.
Yeah. So, trivia fact, just say, if you like The Simpsons, is my housemate at one point during college was Sam Simon, who was one of the three creators of The Simpsons. So
you're kidding?
No.
Holy jumping. That's a brush with fame right there. Isn't that amazing? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting guy.
So we talked about selling out.
Yes.
And then we also reference in the books, you also reference in the book selling in.
Right.
Tell us about selling in.
So the opposite, basic of selling out, right? So instead of saying, look, my job as a seller is to persuade somebody to buy my product, my job as seller is to listen to my buyer, understand the things that are truly most important to them in terms of the challenges they face and the outcomes they want to achieve by addressing those challenges, and then help them get those.
Right.
So yeah, one is, hey, it's all about me. The other, it's, hey, it's all about them. And how can I help you achieve what's important to you?
Whenever we talk to sales teams, I always come back to the fact that also, what would you rather spend your day doing? Those of us who have spent some time in this world, you realize that, even if it was briefly in the early days when you were trying to drag somebody through a script or drag somebody through a process, it was painful. It mm-hmm. didn't feel good to you. You didn't feel kind of at one. You weren't being your authentic self. We thought you had to have a veneer mm-hmm. in front of you to be able to pull it off, because I didn't want to showcase that. May not have felt comfortable selling to somebody I know personally or a friend of my mom's,
right,
or something of that nature. Of course you would want to do that for a living. And we were the opposite of which is sitting down and just saying, hey, well, listen, let's understand you, your business, your environment, your goals, your objectives, what's important to you. And actually, maybe I can guide you to a different future, given what we've done for some other clients who look like you and act like you and mm-hmm. might be the same size.
Mm-hmm.
So it really, to me, it really changes its paradigm for new sellers. If I take all the new sellers we end up training, I think they walk into most training starting to be very worried that they have to be something they're not. And I think
assuming they have to be. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, had a woman on my show runs the undergraduate sales program at Kansas State University, and Dawn Dieter Schmeltz, and she talks about when she teaches her introduction to professional selling for her incoming freshman or sophomore that are new to her program, first class, and she does role plays. These people have no exposure to sales. She said, they're all super salesy.
No kidding.
Right? Yeah, so it's the default. People sort of acquire, to this point you made before about, you assume a veneer of what you think you need to be. Well, people pick it up. Young people pick it up, through, popular media, TV, movies, social media, and so on. They think that's what sales is. And it's contributes not only to sort of the sales behaviors we see that they're so counterproductive. And I think we're seeing sort of the results of sort of an overemphasis, over-indexing on those, and just in the results so many companies get. And we can talk about, abnormally low win rates, but also it discourages, people coming into the profession, women in particular, see these sort of prototypically macho driven behaviors and it's like, well, why do I want to do that? So we start excluding large percents of the population that just look at that and think, well, I don't want to do that, which
Right.
it's not the business is at all.
Right. Right. And when you actually see it done well, we work with a lot of mid-sized SaaS organizations. And if you get a CEO of one of those firms getting in front of a client, they never talk about them, the business, the product. It's all about the client.
Mm-hmm.
And they're showcasing expertise. And you see the room change, because I think the buyers start to understand the intent of that CEO is just to help them.
Yeah.
And if it turns out that benefits the company and her company can actually provide a service, great. And if her company doesn't provide a service, she's also quite focused on helping them.
Right.
So the intent is in the right place.
Yeah. But unfortunately, as that gets translated into action by the team, things get lost in translation. And so I think the big challenge for us is how do we, people talk about training, and it's sort of an element of training, but it's really, how do we socialize this idea within new sellers? And also people have been in the profession for a while. They're not achieving at the levels they should. That, it's not about what you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also quite simple. I tried throughout the book, and everything I write, I try to simplify everything as much as possible. And really influenced by my first boss in sales ages and ages ago, who says, hey, Andy, selling is simple. Not easy, but it's simple. It's right. It really is simple. It's just not easy, even when you understand the way it's supposed to be. So, but why do we make it harder for ourselves? Right? If we indulge in these salesy behaviors that cause buyers to put up their defenses, we're just making it harder for ourselves. And it doesn't mean that they're never ever going to buy from you. There's always situations where they do, and enough people do that people still keep acting that way. But I think the world's changed and changing, and there's research that comes out that says, Gartner or somebody saying, no one wants to talk to salespeople anymore.
Mm.
And it's like, no, that's just so wrong on so many levels, right? But it's the easy story to sell. It's like the one that recently is like, do you realize buyers only spend 17% of their buying journey with sellers? And I'm thinking and going, wow, that's a lot. I think of people I've sold to over the years, they spent 5% of their time in their buying journey with me. That's probably a lot. I mean, it's so out of context, right? 17%. Right. The number is like, that must be low. It's like, no, that's a lot. Think about these people. They're spending all their time in their office. They barely talk to salespeople. Never have. So we have all these misconceptions about the way things have been and the way they are now. And the same with Gartner, with buyers no longer want to talk to sellers. Well, back to your story. I think in the recorded history of humankind, no buyer has ever wanted to talk to a salesperson. Right? But they need to. They need to. Now, if you can't, as a seller, if you can't help them in their job of making a decision, then they have no time for you. That's always been the case. Mm-hmm. Again, there's implicit in these research reports are, this is different. And it's like, no, this is BS. That's not different. Buyers have never wanted to talk to salespeople that waste their time.
Right.
So you've always had the same imperative as a seller to be able to come in and provide value, something of value that enables the buyer to move closer to making a decision. And if you can't do that, then they've never had time for you.
Well, I always like these. At an interesting discussion with your friend, by the way, Frank Cespedes, late last week in Boston. And I had this conversation that said, I said, Frank, hey, I'm writing this book and so on and so forth. And I'm trying to find the E equals MC squared for sales. And he kind of shook his head and he said, hey, Mark, we're not putting a man on the moon here.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, it's not scientific, it's not accretive, that where the learning keeps adding on top. He said, there are fundamental ways of doing this that
Mm-hmm.
haven't changed in decades.
Yep.
However, each new generation needs to hear it in a different language so they internalize it. So don't apologize for going back to some of these basics and these fundamentals that haven't changed. It was a real epiphany for me, by the way.
Yeah, well, and his point's a great point, and he does it in his book. I try to do it in my book. Is sort of just as the basics, and you don't call it the basics, but just you simplify these concepts that are fairly eternal, and everybody just wants to assume there's more to it, and I think that's what I tried to really make clear in this book with the 4 pillars. This is really just, in my mind, 4 things that really influence the experience the buyer has with you that drives their choice of, and that's these 4 pillars, like on connection, curiosity, understanding, generosity. And if you just focus on those as a seller, I mean, there's other things you want to learn, how to make a decent presentation, fine. But as I was talking about, like the 17% thing is, we get so sidetracked by things that aren't important. And I don't know, I'm dating myself a little bit. Do you remember one of my fun movies I love watching all the time, if it's on, I see it as Meatballs with Bill Murray. Took place
Canadian movie, Ivan Reichman.
And he's got that famous scene at the end. He's giving the pep talk before the competition with the camp across the lake.
Right.
And he goes, it just doesn't, they're smarter than us, they're richer than us. It just doesn't matter. And we have all these things in sales that calls to mind. It's like the 17%, it just doesn't matter. Is the buyer 50% of the way through their buying process? It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And we can go through a list of these things that and people get so sidetracked by it.
Right.
And they don't focus on things that really matter, to my mind. And I'll give you an example of one, which is, I'll be writing more and more about, is win rate. What percentage of your qualified opportunities do you win? Now, the SaaS world is basically built upon this model where if they get a 20% win rate, everybody declares victory and goes home.
Really?
Oh yeah, I think the industry in the SaaS average in the SaaS world is low 20%, right? Some are lower, some are a little bit higher. And I love asking, a sales leader in a SaaS company and a marketing leader in a SaaS company. So if you got a 20% win rate, you're winning 1 out of every 5 of your most qualified opportunities. Can you say you have product market fit? No, something's wrong, right? If you can only win 1 out of 5, if your win rate isn't 51%, you got a problem, a fundamental problem. And there are apologists for, the SaaS sales model that say, win rate doesn't matter. It's all about deal flow through the funnel, blah, 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 blah. It's like bullshit, right? I mean, it's just not true. The win rate is the buyer's vote on how well you've done in helping them make a decision. That's their ultimate referendum on you as a seller. And doesn't matter if you're hitting your number or not, and you're only winning 1 out of 20, you're doing a bad job. I hate to tell you, you're just doing a bad job. I don't care if you're hitting your number. Your number should be 5 times higher. I mean, it's just, and we've accepted it. And it's part of the problems, I'm writing, trying to address now, because think about it. I mean, if you're a seller, and we talk about, if you're a seller and you're only winning 1 out of every 5 of your opportunities, your win rate's less than 50%, let's say. If practice makes perfect, what behavior are you practicing the most?
Wow. Losing.
You're getting really good at it because it's being reinforced all the time.
Yeah.
This is a competitive business we're in. As if you're a salesperson, you're competitive, you're accepting that you're losing more than you're winning. Don't you want to change that? I mean, it's just nuts. And so to me, this is another perspective. It's like everybody thinks, we've got this great sales model, the SaaS sales model. It's like, why do we think that was the only way SaaS should sell? because it's not working really. Yeah, a few companies have grown, some have gone public, yada, yada, yada. There's lots of reasons for that. And Salesforce, I think they would have succeeded with several different sales models.
Right.
Because they had the right product at the right time.
Well, also think of the cost of sales. So think of the cost of those losses.
Yeah.
If you actually have, sales engineers in front of, something that costs more than 100K ARR, where people have to get involved and assess the customer's environment, and heaven forbid there's implementations and customizations or configurations that are very significant. You just can't have that kind of win rate. Enterprise software did not exist for many years with a 20.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Because you couldn't go around losing 4 and 5.
No, well, but on top of that is the other thing that people don't think about. I've talked about this, Frank Cespedes, several times, is in sales, we fundamentally don't understand productivity. And this is also problematic, is productivity to most people in sales is, well, my goal is to make 50 calls today, and I made 50 calls. I was productive. And I think, not really. I mean, how many of those led to an outcome that was productive? And so to me, productivity has got a very common definition. It says around the world, rate of output per unit of input. So in sales, it really boils down to what's your revenue generated per hour of sales time. And I can ask 100 CEOs or 100 CROs this question, and I guarantee 100 of them don't have the answer. What's their revenue generated per hour of selling time?
Well, I'll be honest.
Well, the thing is, when people talk about productive capacity of your sales organization, a lot of people think, well, we've got 10 sellers and we're getting $1 million quota each. We'll put the fudge factor in, only X% will hit it. So $7.5 million. Like, well, no, that has nothing to do with the potential productive capacity of the team. If I know, and I've managed teams this way, so I know this, so I've done it. If I know that, John is at $1,000 per actual sales hour, right? Requires people track their time to do this, which is doing it for decades. Lots of companies do it. Is then, and now Joe is at 750. I can start aggregate everybody and say, well, this is their productivity. This is assuming a certain, let's say 30% of their actual time is sales hours. I can start figuring out what our productive capacity of the organization is, and be a lot more accurate than the way we do it now. It gives me a lot more data to use to try to change it. If I have 2 people that are achieving the same amount, and I've had this in the past where I've managed teams, but one took twice the number of hours as the other one.
Yeah.
Or one took twice as many SE hours, or one took twice as many management hours.
Right.
I mean, you need to understand this. I was talking to a client a couple of years ago, and they were celebrating this huge deal they'd won, huge for them at the time. And they're very good about documenting how much time it took or number of meetings they had, or they weren't tracking the actual hours. But I did. I sort of penciled out. I went to the CEO and said, yeah, you can do 2 of these this year.
Wow.
He said, what do you mean? I said, look at the time it took to make this happen. So unless we're going to make changes in terms of, either upskilling, knowledge increase, more efficient meetings, more effective meetings, so on and so forth, it's just like, I'm surprised the customer kept their interest long enough to make a decision. It just dragged, just too much. No one's thinking about this. And so, we are still so fixated on this idea of quota. And quota in my mind, suppresses total output. Because Charles Goodhart, who came up with this Goodhart's law formulation back in the 60s, said that when a measure becomes a target, it loses all value as a measure. And the reason being is that you optimize your process to achieve the measure. So you're suddenly not saying I can produce a lot more. No, I'm going to produce to this particular number. And yeah, so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, that's something we're going to take away. Goodhart's research. So that always happens, actually. Our communications to all the teams that we work with saying, hey, this quota is not knocking the ball out of the park.
No.
But it doesn't really sink in. When you say, hey, this quota is the minimum expectation, whatever, it never really sinks in. It always ends up becoming this target.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's just a way you get paid.
Right. So I advocate is said, look, if I knew a seller's productivity, then I would rather comp them on improving their productivity. Because then, they're not aimed at a specific target per se. It's like, hey, you're going to generate more revenue per hour of sales time.
So Andy, when you're going in consulting with businesses, is that one of the things you do as a starting point? You start to measure the productivity of the sales organization?
If they're open to it.
If they're open to it.
Not everybody is.
Yeah.
But you can start in general in sales, we have to orient ourselves away from thinking of time as a duration and think about it as a quantity. So yeah, question I typically ask when I'm doing an assessment, let's say for a consulting engagement, so on is so how long is your sales cycle? Oh, 3 months, 90 days. I said, no, that's not your sales cycle. How many hours does it take you to move selling hours or total hours? So you got other departments. Does it take to move a prospect from initial point of contact to a close? I don't care over what period of time it takes, because the number of hours it takes dictates how many of them you can do.
Right. You know who knows that?
No one knows the answer to that question.
You know who knows the answer to that question very well?
Who?
Professional services firms.
Oh, absolutely.
That do consulting like me and you.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Right.
Right.
So, and the way I came about this is back ages and ages ago. I was working for a company that did some defense work. And so in the United States, and maybe probably Canada too, is when you're doing defense work, even though I wasn't on the defense side of the house, is we all had to track our hours. Now it's pretty easy on the non-defense side because we just charged everything to overhead. But everybody else on the defense side was charging to project numbers or job numbers, right?
Right.
Just like professional services firms. So I had this idea when I took over sales, was like, well, why don't we see how much time it's really taken to close deals? So when we had a qualified opportunity come into the pipeline, signed a job number to it, and everybody charged to the job number. Wow. Salesperson, SE, and so on. Managed, VP of me if I came on the job or, contributed. And we're doing it anyway. It's just a little more detail. We weren't doing it to 15 minutes. We were doing it to half hour. But it's like, wasn't that hard? Everybody did it. Everybody talks about, well, how do you get people to track time? It's hard enough getting them to put things into CRM. So it's easy. They don't get paid. You got to submit your time card to get paid. Compliance was universal. But then you had all this data. And so I knew, right, how much, I really knew my cost of acquisition. Now I was selling really big deals, much bigger than, SaaS companies. These are 7, 8 figure, sometimes 9 figure deals. But I knew, and we knew as an organization. Yeah. What was the cost of putting that proposal together? We weren't estimating, we knew.
Very meticulous.
Yeah.
Very detailed oriented. Well, this concept of productivity, you talked about, hey, do we know how long it takes? You can only do X number of deals. Our experience has been out there, you're going to find some sales organizations with some senior folks who may be highly unconsciously competent at this whole exercise. And, I'll use an example in Canada. If you want to take on selling to a Canadian bank in a regulated industry, that's going to be an extraordinarily long sales cycle.
Right.
So they've got an oligopoly. They exchange this much market share back and forth. No U.S. companies can come in and sell retail banking, so it's protected. And so the game is risk management. It's not really about growth. It's about risk management for the most part. Those sales cycles are extraordinarily long. So you can play that game. They're the largest employers in Canada, so the deals are large, but that can't be something you're counting on, because the concept of a compelling event does not exist in a regulated industry for the most part, unless it's associated with risk management.
Yeah. I think that's largely true with big enterprises in general, right? So yeah, your pipeline looks different. Yeah, because you're talking about big deals, right? I mean, let's say some really large deals, and I didn't have 5x pipeline coverage. I mean, it's ridiculous. I still think that's ridiculous. I had 1.5. But the point was, if somebody got to that point in my pipeline where they were qualified and I was forecasting them, my conviction was always I was going to win. Because when I talk about this and amp up your sales, is I wasn't qualifying them because they wanted to buy a product similar to mine. I qualified them to buy my product.
Right. Yeah.
And this is a challenge for companies, because it's always been a challenge for companies, especially in the tech space. And this is not a new phenomenon. It's exceedingly difficult to establish any sort of, not just establish, but sustain any sort of meaningful technical product differentiation.
Right.
So, you need to be conscious of having some. But when you find the things that are perceived to be differentiated, you need to make them the focal point of the buyer's perception of the value you're providing. So you're not just like everybody else. And so, if I had somebody that deep into my pipeline, they were qualified to buy my product. No, didn't win 100% of the time, because that's the way the world works. But won a high fraction of the time. And we could still do the same today. I mean, it's just, I find in the SaaS world in particular, but it's not exclusive to that, is people are just so unmindful of the importance of win rate as just this indicator of how well you're doing. And this idea of predictable revenue is, like, to me, it's sort of laughable if you're at these low win rates. It's predictably bad, sure, but it's playing the odds, right? You're not really selling, you're just playing the odds, because I know if I get enough stuff in the pipeline, I can be semi-effective, and I'm always going to close 1 out of 5.
Well, welcome to any form of, I don't want to use a brand name, but welcome to any form of automated sequence outreach technology.
Yeah.
It's small percentages of shockingly large numbers polluting the universe with spam. And but the return rate of 2.1% seems to be okay, to litter the universe with garbage. So now certain channels are unusable. LinkedIn slowly becomes this spam engine, because every financial advisor out there connects with you and then pitches you.
Yeah. Well, but it's yes, the environment is polluted, and we've done that to ourselves. Still ways to get through, but the point being is we have to look at the world differently, right? Because we're going to come into a time, very high probability, we're going to come into a recession in the next couple of years, or next year, probably at the latest. And all these companies that have sort of operated as if the world always operates, grows up and to the right for the last 13 years, which 14 years, which encompasses a good chunk of the people that are working in SaaS and the leadership of SaaS company and so on, is when the world goes to hell in a handbasket, when you've got the same number of companies competing for half the dollars, you have to learn how to sell. And this is a lesson that this is not a new lesson for this generation. Every generation, I had to learn it going through previous recessions, is like, oh, yeah, you got to pay attention to details. It's really about the quality of this experience you're creating for the buyers. It becomes even more meaningful when times are tight, because that's how you differentiate yourself, how you sell. And again, too many of sales leaders today just aren't thinking about that. And this is where the win rate becomes so important, because that is the ultimate vote of the buyers on their experience with you as a seller.
Well, Andy, I think, you said 18, it's been 18 years. I was chatting with Herman Simon from Simon Kucher and Partners, the founder of Simon Kucher and Partners. He's written 35 books on pricing strategy and business. And like yourself, just a really sharp fellow. And he said, with 8 to 10% inflation, we could get to a point where the environment is so tough, there's no one in management today who's actually lived through this before, because it would take us back to the 70s. So it's
yes, it's not. Yeah, well, it's hate to say it, that's when I got started selling.
Right. So and he that was the joke he made. He said, "Listen," he said, he was the only guy around at the time in a management position. There's so few of us who have been around that long that it's the businesses we're selling to won't know how to navigate this either, because those management teams have not lived through these types of economic times. It's not the same old thing again.
No, I was selling computer systems at the time, on-prem computer equipment,
big ones,
room full of metal, and not the biggest. Toward the end, I sold the biggest systems, but my sort of average deal size maybe back then was about 125,000, which in today's term is $500,000 or so.
Yeah, huge.
And people had to finance them, and interest rates are at 20%.
Wow.
And we still had to go sell, and businesses still had to operate. So as a new salesperson, we had to spend a lot of time with people trying to help them justify the expenditure, because their interest costs alone are fairly significant on this stuff. But the competitive pressures or stuff were such that for many of them, this was, not to date myself unnecessarily, this, for most of the companies I was selling to, it was their first venture into computerization.
Of course it would have been.
These are good-sized businesses, selling largely a construction industry for a period of time, they were entering transactions manually on a ledger card into a computer system. So there were certain pressures, but at 20% interest rates, on financing, that was most the deal for us is helping them find a source that would provide financing. And we developed relationships with several leasing companies.
Yeah.
But then trying to work out the terms, and it was, I probably spent, oh gosh, I was going to try to estimate percentage, but a large percentage of my time, I can't remember exactly what, helping people line up financing as we were trying to close the deal.
So this was before that whole industry of financing, equipment financing.
It was just sort of starting.
Yeah.
Sam Zell and, ITEL and his company, whatever. Yeah. It was just sort of starting to go at that time.
Well, my main experience back then, I might date myself here a little bit, was, my dad, God bless him, had a mortgage. Like, we moved into a beautiful new home. He made a huge investment. And I remember being a kid at the dining room table where this darn mortgage rate of 18% kept coming up. It's only now that I realized, living in our world of 2%, 18% would have just been paralyzing, just shocking.
Well, especially on an adjustable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, my first mortgage was 13.5%.
Wow.
Fixed, fortunately. I'm not sure in the US they had adjustables at that point, but 13.5%.
Oh, and just amazing. Listen, let's circle, but we could tell the stories of those things. But what I do
Well,
want to circle back.
I was going to say the final point is it as adverse as those conditions were, is they force you to become better at the fundamentals of actually selling. This is where helping the buyer make the decision, helping them make the decision, not imposing yourself on them, but because there was no urgency for them to do anything really, because it was just too damn expensive, is you had to help them understand that what the value was going to be for them to do this in a very real way.
And in the book, Sell Without Selling Out, you talk about that, helping them create that vision of success. So really getting into the discovery,
right,
and helping them create that vision of success. And there were 5 or 6 things you brought up as key points to help them that way. One was record all understandings in a shared document.
Yeah. I mean, this is more common practice these days, right? There are applications actually that help you do that. But if going back to the discovery part is, and they'll play into this, is I think what people need to think about is that, and this is something, a lesson I learned early in my career, but been validated time and time again, is that every customer has one thing that's more important than everything else. And you need to find out what that is. And you can't go ask the question, well, what's the most important thing to you? It's a little more subtle than that. But this is what I talk about. Through the pillars, you build your connection with the buyer, you build a level of trust, you use your curiosity to ask these, impact questions and other questions that cause the buyer to think, about the true impact of the choices and trade-offs they're going to make. But you build that connection, you earn the right to ask those questions. And eventually you get that answer but there's always one thing. And you just need to keep that in mind. So I call it the most important thing in the book. What is their most important thing? And who is it most important to? Right? Because it's not going to be equally as important to everybody. And
right,
you really want to find out, generally, my experience has been, when you find out what the most important thing is, it's generally most important to the most important person to the decision, which is not necessarily the CEO. It could be the person that has operating responsibility for the equipment, or be the functional user, or whatever. But you have to find that most important thing. When you find that, then suddenly you're in agreement with the buyer. This is our most important thing. Now you can start creating that narrative around this vision, what I call the vision of success.
Okay.
Right. I make the point in the book as I did in Amp Up Your Sales, is there's really only one story. Yes, we want to tell stories, but there's really only one story the buyer really wants to hear. And that's their own story. The story, this is the vision of success is. This is a story of what it's going to be like to use your product or service to achieve the outcomes they want to achieve. So you discover that most important thing. Now you both have the same target in mind. Now you can start working with them to build this vision of what success would look like.
And Andy, the one thing that resonated so much with me, given what we see today, and I'm surprised by this, because like you, when I was in the corporate world, 15 years ago, I was doing mega deals. And, they might be hundreds of millions of dollars. And one was even a B, it was a billion.
Oh, wow. I never got that big, but yeah.
But and so much good fortune surrounding that. But at the end of the day, what you ended up doing at a deal that size, because these were outsourcing deals, both parties were working off one set of financial spreadsheets that talked about the dollar impact of the transaction. That did not stop them from negotiating you.
Yep.
Okay. But first of all, both sides had to get aligned on, hey, what's the NPV of this opportunity? What's the return on investment? How much money are you saving or making? In simplest terms. And once we agreed on that, everybody said, hey, does everybody agree with this picture? Yes. Then they started negotiating. And then they said, here's what the split should look like. But it was never going back saying, I'm not sure. So you knew if it was compelling, what you didn't know whether you're going to be able to come to an end game on all the T's and C's and everything else associated with it. But, you talk about helping them build that vision of success. That's the biggest gap I see today when we're working with teams and we say, why do they need to do that? And our sales leaders will come back and say, they'll give us qualitative responses. They need to stay competitive and all these kinds of things. And you say, well, listen, what's the NPV of the deal on them? Or could you write a decision memo for them to take to their boss and actually put the economic model?
Right.
We're nowhere near it. For the most part, even significant transactions, they just don't seem to be doing that today. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities out there.
I agree 100%. So, oh yeah. And so for me, this, I contend, is you don't have a qualified prospect until you've reached that point.
I think that's a very good qualification metric.
Because if you haven't got them to the point, the buyer to the point where either they've done the internal business justification at that level, or they're open to receiving it from you and they sign off on it, they're not ready to make a decision. To me, this is what leads to no decisions. The no decision.
Right.
Is you put in all this work, but you're fundamentally, you haven't given the customer a reason to buy.
Right.
I mean, that's what this was, a financial justification. And it's not just pure ROI calculators. What's the impact going to be on the business going forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if they don't know that, if they haven't internalized it, if they haven't said, yeah, we need to allocate somebody to do that work, or we want to work with you to come up with that, they're not ready to make a decision. And you see this all the time on forecasts. Yeah, went to no decision. Why? It's like, yeah, this is, to me, and we just had a guest on my show, Jen Allen from the Challenger. We talked about, the psychology of no decision, but to me, that's the worst of all possible outcomes, is a no decision. I'd rather lose a deal. At least I know that we competed and went through, and we gave the customer enough to make a decision.
I think for most of the clients I work with, I probably would rather they go to no decision, because in my heart, I feel like we might have a shot 18 months from now. And if we lose to somebody else, we could be locked out for life. Sure.
But oftentimes you've burnt, the bridges behind you and getting to a no decision. And not always, right? I mean, I tried not to. I'm sure I thought hard enough, think back about no decisions that came back around. But I've found oftentimes that you've spoiled the water. And when they come back, it's like, that wasn't a good decision because we spent all this time with them. They blame the seller for not being able to make a decision, right? They didn't give us what we needed to be able to make a decision. Yeah. So what's going to be different this time?
And by the way, it is the seller's fault.
It is. Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So, again, if our job's to help them, run a better business one way or the other, and guide them to an opportunity to do that, part and parcel of that is we actually know how decisions gets made, because everything in our pipeline, we're working through some client who's making a decision. Mm-hmm. Some of the clients you're working with, of course, they only make these significant decisions once every 5 years. I mean, they're just not pro at doing it. No, not all. That's yeah. I mean, I think Gartner pointed that out with their buyer enablement study several years ago and so on. It's just like, this is new and it's complex, and they're only going to do it this way once. And it'll be another 3 to 5 years before they bring this group together to do it again. Yeah. It'll be a whole different set of people. I saw stats last night that the average salesperson by the time they're 48 has had like 12 different jobs. I mean, it's like, and so you think about it, on the buyer side, I'm sure employment is, similar on both sides of the equation. It's like, people are just changing jobs more frequently. So institutional knowledge gets lost because people go other places. It's such an interesting business discipline we focus on right now, with so much happening. Mm-hmm. And then some of us see that, it's a little bit back to the future in many ways. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things change. Now that, a lot of things stay the same. We just have to focus on getting better at these most important things. Yeah. Well, buyers humans, there's this implicit undertone in a lot of writing and so on, is that
the way we think has changed. No, we haven't evolved that quickly. We take tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years to evolve in fundamental ways. Sure, the things that influence us change. But yeah, humans are still humans. And that's why it's really, this book is all about, okay, we do a pretty good job of training humans how to be sellers. Where we really suck is training sellers how to be human. And that's what makes the difference when they interact with buyers. So that's what this book is about.
And this book is something, folks, you should pick up for sure. Sell Without Selling Out. So, we touched briefly just on one small portion of it, the 4 core pillars: connection, curiosity, understanding, generosity, as these 4 core sales behaviors. But with all the books that everybody here knows I read and love and study, I'm looking for those folks who are capable of taking complex things and simplifying them, because someone like me can't apply complex theory to every day. I need to simplify things so I can use it and get better. And Andy, this book is kind of just the penultimate example of how to do that. The other thing I found was a very interesting read. So when you humanize with the stories, I enjoy it. I like it. I want to keep going. It makes me a little sad to think I have to write a book that follows something like this, to be honest with you. So it didn't exactly put wind in my sails, given the fact I'm trying to write right now. But first of all,
I'm sure this will be great.
First of all, I want to say to you, Andy, thank you for joining the show again. It's always
love to talk to you. Always, Mark.
Yeah, just such a pleasure having you on the show. And how do people find out more about you?
Oh gosh, LinkedIn. Start there. Very active on LinkedIn, and sort of my primary channel. I don't blog anymore. It's all LinkedIn. Listen to my podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul. We're up to episode 1080.
That's the top sales podcast in the world, gang. I know what I'm talking about there too.
Well, thank you very much. And then you can visit my website, andypaul.com, though that's in the midst of going through some changes. But yeah, those are the primary places. And yeah, we've got a bunch of new stuff coming later this year. It's exciting. And I'm starting to work on my next book.
Well, we'll be penciling you in for 18 months from now.
Well, I don't think it's that quick, but at least I don't think so. But I have a little bit of a head start because it's in part based on material that didn't make it into this book.
Okay.
That we with my editor, she wisely counseled me to reserve it for the next one. But yeah, it's along the same lines. It's in terms of helping simplify complex tasks, really about a new perspective on the buying process.
That'll be interesting.
Simplifying that which is going to simplify the sales process as well. So,
well, I think this is just such a breath of fresh air is there's so many sellers out there today who are walking to work, putting on a veneer, and taking on this book to understand that you can be who you are and humanize the way you sell and add huge value. And by the way, those of us who have had a chance to cross over to that side of selling realize that's how you want to spend your life anyway. It's more fun and enjoyable and interesting to do things this way.
Absolutely.
We're not marketing automatrons. We want to actually get involved and engage.
Right. And a question I get along those lines from people who've read the book or, heard me talk or read what I write on LinkedIn is like, well, yeah, I'm just feeling frustrated. I feel, constrained with my boss. How do I talk to them about this? Excuse me. We'll say, well, you need to have a conversation as you think there's a way that's more aligned with who you are and that you think could be more productive and perform at higher levels. And you just need to be given the freedom to go do that. And they hold you accountable for hitting your numbers still, but you need freedom to go do that. And if they won't give you that freedom, go find another place, right? Go find a new situation, because, the hard fact is that for most people, your success is situational, right? Is lots of people write on LinkedIn in sales about, closing big deals, and I make 7 figures, and yeah, these people have, but they made 7 figures in a particular situation, right? Not all situations enable you to do that. So it's like everything in life. It's in large part due to where you are at that point. So if you're feeling constrained by the person you work for, you feel like, yeah, you could do better, you're just not being able to be given the autonomy to experiment, go find a new situation. And yeah, I determined early in my career that I was sort of always going to be my own person, much maybe to the frustration of some bosses, though I always delivered. But yeah, some people are always going to prioritize conformity over performance. Find a place that values performance over conformity.
Nice. Good counsel indeed. And thank you again, Andy.
Thanks, Mark.
And thank you, friends, for listening today. It's always a pleasure sharing some thoughts on professional sales with everybody out there. We really appreciate you listening to the podcast. And first of all, if you've got ideas for how we can improve the Selling Well podcast, I personally want to hear them. So you can send me an email to markcox@inthefunnel.com. That goes directly to me. And we're really big fans of constructive criticism. Let us know how we can make this time more valuable to you, and we'll apply those things. And if you did enjoy today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast, and we'll see everybody next time. Thanks again, Andy.
Thanks, Mark.